Today, I have a good old spook story for you, the Amityville Horror House. But it's not the haunting that brought you a gazillion movies. Nope, it's about the mass murder inside that house that came before the haunting. Around 6:30 p.m. on November 13, 1974, Ronnie DeFeo stumbled into Henry's bar in Amityville, Long Island, shouting, "You got to help me. I think my mother and my father are shot." The men in the bar practically ran to the impressive colonial-style home on 112 Ocean Avenue. On the second floor, they found the bodies of Ronald DeFeo Jr., his wife Louise, and 3 of the DeFeo children. On the third floor, they found their other daughter, Dawn, all 6 of them dead, shot to death in their beds while they slept.
He came, he opened the door, and he was screaming, "Come on, help me, somebody shot my mother and father." And everyone ran out of the bar, and that was it. They all took off. No, I had to stay, I was tending bar. They all jumped in his car and took off.
The only surviving member of the prominent family was sitting in the kitchen, near hysterics, when the police arrived. Long Island had just had the worst mass murder in its history, a case that would lay the groundwork for a haunted house so infamous that it inspired more than 30 movies, documentaries, and spin-offs. More than any other haunting in the world.
Driven away by an onslaught of tourists and pranksters who still continue to come and gawk, not fooled by the now changed address out in front. Now, why did you come by tonight to look at this house?
To see what that book was all about and everything about the house, the way it looked, and all the things that people say about it.
Oh, we just wanted to see what it was like. I guess we just specifically came from Chicago to see it.
Well, do you believe all the stories?
Yeah, I do. They're kind of creepy. They gave me the creeps that...
Why do you believe it when the present owners say there's no truth to it at all, and they've been living here for almost 2 years?
Oh, I didn't know they had present owners. I thought it was deserted.
A man who said he was a friend of the Cromedies also came by, but insisted he not be photographed. You say a friend of yours lives here and you've been in the house. Is there any truth to all these stories that it's haunted and there are weird smells and slime and all those other things?
Nothing at all. It's all a bunch of lies.
Well, how do you feel about all these tourists coming by and the movie opening and all of this? What do you think of that?
Well, I live right down the road and it's a pain in the neck because you can't even get down the block.
But the murders themselves are even weirder than the haunting that followed. Some might argue that the place was infected by the supernatural long before the family that told the world about their 28-day horror ordeal when they moved in a year after those terrible murders. Before we start, this is not a story about the Lutz family that lived in the house and claimed that they experienced the worst recorded haunting in cinema history. Hey, it makes for awesome films, don't get me wrong, but I think that they were all full of hot air and that this whole thing was an extravagant tale crafted to make a lot of money. Instead, this is the actual case that happened before the Lutz family moved into the house. When a son killed his entire family and the wild claims he made that were so insane that the Lutz family had all the outrageous details they needed to craft what is arguably the coolest horror story of all time. Let's get into it.
What kind of things, George, happened physically? What were some of the things that happened that scared you?
Well, at first, just moving into the house was fine. It's a lovely house.
Yeah.
And we enjoyed moving in. Within a week, Kathy's hand had been touched by something that we discussed and couldn't explain. It was just something unseen. Within...
I mean, this is in the daylight, or was it?
Yes,
It was during the day.
Right.
Okay.
We also had hordes of flies that would appear within 2 rooms. And no matter how many times we would kill them, they would reappear.
Amityville, New York is the kind of upper middle-class neighborhood where the wealthy go to escape the fumes of the city. The 3-story colonial was like most houses in the neighborhood, grand, old, and postcard perfect. But the family inside weren't at all the catalog perfection they tried to portray. The DeFeos were, well, troubled. Ronald Sr., Louise DeFeo, and their 5 children were not at all as happy in camp as they pretended to be. Louise had a bit of a pill addiction, and Ronald Sr., behind that rich, jolly laugh and the front row of the church, was a tyrant who'd acquired his successful business thanks to some past mafia ties. There's just no other way he could have afforded that swanky house on the income of a car dealership. And he wasn't just connected to some low-level crime family, he was connected to the infamous Genovese crime family. If you know anything about mob history, they're right up there with Costello, Capone, and Lucky Luciano. Serious bad guys is what I'm saying. And then there's that famous temper of his that he often took out on his family. The children, for the most part, were all right. 12-year-old Mark and 9-year-old John were boisterous, good-natured kids that got into a respectable amount of trouble without making complete nuisances of themselves. 19-year-old Dawn and 13-year-old Allison were pretty, sweet, and bookish. All the children were still living in the home, even the two that were over 18, mostly because Ronald Sr. liked to keep a close eye on everyone, especially his oldest son, Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr. I'll be referring to him as Ronnie from this point onwards to avoid confusion with his father. Ronald had plans for his son to take over the dealership, but Ronnie was more interested in where he was going to get his next fix from. He was an addict, just like his mother. Actually, Ronnie hadn't been all right for years by this point. He had antisocial personality disorder, which wasn't diagnosed. This lack of proper treatment led Ronnie to seek out options to self-medicate, namely with heroin and LSD. Unfortunately, those substances, coupled with a serious mental condition, can lead to a dangerous degradation of a person's mental faculties over time. He was, however, very close to his sister Dawn. Now back to the scene of the crime. When police walked into that house, Ronnie was putting on an appropriate show of being traumatized and afraid in the kitchen. The first thing he told the officers interviewing him was that his father had some old beef with a Genovese crime family hitman, Luis Fellini. FYI, Fellini was a terrible person, but he had nothing to do with these specific murders. But for now, police moved Ronnie to the station for his safety. Involvement from the Genovese family was a threat that they took extremely seriously. Ronnie said he'd been up until 2 o'clock that morning watching a very trippy movie called Castle Keep in his basement bedroom. At 4 in the morning, he went upstairs to use the bathroom. He heard the toilet flush and assumed that Mark was inside the bathroom because his wheelchair was standing in the hallway in front of the bedroom door. So based on that detail, it was assumed that everyone was alive at 4 in the morning. Ronnie then went back down, got dressed, and headed out to work at around 5 or 6. It was a bit of a commute, an hour's drive, and employees did confirm that he was at work. After work, he came home expecting his family to be seated at the dinner table, but when no one was there, Ronnie went looking for them. When he found his parents dead in their bedroom, he ran for help without searching the rest of the house. So police took a closer look at the crime scene, and boy, was it a strange one. Every single one of the 6 victims were found in their beds, apparently killed while they were asleep. The parents were shot first, twice each, with a high-powered rifle. If any of you have ever been hunting before, you know a rifle is damn loud. They'd later find out that it was a .35 action Marlin rifle that belonged to Ronald Sr. Now, that's not the biggest rifle in the world, but still, it lets off a bang that's louder than a frickin' jet engine. Not kidding. Go look it up. That's 150 decibels of sound going off. Take away 30 decibels for the insulating effect of the house's walls, and it would still have been heard a mile away from the scene. Yet, not one of the neighbors, the closest being just 50 yards away, reported hearing anything. And no one in the house reacted either. The killer walked in, shot everyone, one by one, and not a single person in that house got up at any point during that massacre. You're probably thinking that their dinner or their hot chocolate was drugged, knocking them out cold. Nope. All the tox screens came back clean. They were sober and definitely should have woken up. Dawn and Louise, it seems, did briefly wake up when the killer entered their rooms. They were sleeping on their stomachs and attempted to push themselves up from the bed when they were shot. They'd never actually made it out of their beds, so they were killed where they lay. How did Louise not hear 2 shots going off next to her when her husband was killed, and only attempted to rise when the killer was standing over her already? That's another thing that was weird. Every one of the 6 in the family was sleeping on their stomachs, every single one of them. Yet their bodies hadn't been moved after death. They died where they lay. Women rarely sleep on their stomachs because their chests make it uncomfortable. In the same vein, Ronald Sr. had a beer belly that would have made it virtually impossible to breathe properly if he slept that way. Statistically, All of them sleeping in exactly the same position is virtually impossible. And there's a little detail about the gun that I left out before. There were 2 rifles belonging to the family, both stored in Ronnie's basement bedroom. There were a Marlin .35 caliber rifle and a Marlin .30-30 rifle. The Marlin .35 was proven to be the murder weapon, but Luis's wounds were massive, not consistent with the 2 Marlins at all. Yes, the bullets that shot her were the same cartridge that killed all the others, but the wound it left behind was unusually large for that specific gun. Many argue that that means that there was more than one weapon present that night, and that would mean 2 killers. Dawn's nightgown had gunpowder on it. No, not on the back from where she'd been shot. It was found on her chest, the side she was lying on when she was killed. Since she hadn't moved after being shot, it must have been deposited there before she went to bed. That indicates that she fired a weapon at one point or another. And the inconsistencies with Dawn's body doesn't stop there. The whole family was killed at around 3 in the morning, but not Dawn. Rigor mortis indicated that she died a few hours later. This is all extremely strange, and Ronnie's story was about to get even stranger. When the hitman theory didn't pan out, and it was proven that the majority of the family were killed at around 3 in the morning, and that they were not alive at 4 o'clock like he'd claimed, he folded like a noodle and spilled the beans. Well, sort of. First, he said that Fellini, that hitman, and an unfamiliar man had held him at gunpoint the night before and killed his family in front of him one by one. Then, he said that Dawn, upset that her father had forbidden her from moving away to Florida with her boyfriend, was the instigator. She'd shot her father after an argument. Luis was so distraught over the whole ordeal that she killed all of her children, except for Ronnie, and then went to bed next to her dead husband, and that's where Ronnie shot her to death. Then, he turned the story around yet again. In this version, he and Dawn had done it. They stood over the parents and shot them at the same time. But when he went out to throw away the revolver that Dawn used to kill Louise with, Dawn killed the 3 kids to eliminate witnesses. Ronnie was so horrified at what she had done that he killed Dawn later that morning. Dawn's plans to move away with her boyfriend and her father's refusal to allow it were true. The boyfriend was tracked down and he confirmed it. He also confirmed that Ronald Sr. was extremely violent and controlling towards his children. Out of all of Ronnie's stories, this was the only version that held any weight, because it could be at least partially corroborated by an outside party. Eventually, with all of his crackpot stories exhausted, he confessed to killing his family himself and even told police where he discarded the rifle in a storm drain. They found both rifles that belonged to the family and an empty revolver holster, exactly where Ronnie told them it was. They searched for the missing revolver that he said he'd thrown in the marina behind the house, but couldn't locate it. Another partial confirmation to that last sequence of events that he's told. When they examined the rifles, they were stunned to discover that no silencing device was used on them. When they suggested that he slipped sedatives into their dinner, Ronnie agreed. When they'd asked if he'd done it for the life insurance, he said, sure. What I'm getting at is that Ronnie was highly suggestible to anything that was said to him. I'm not saying that he didn't kill his family. He definitely did. But Ronnie wasn't right upstairs, and he hadn't been for a while. Judging by the heroin in his system, that night he'd taken enough drugs to tip him into a full-on psychotic episode, a condition he'd been bordering on for years. The only real question was whether he had help or not. All he could say was that he was angry at his father, and he went upstairs to kill him. But once he got started, he just couldn't stop, even to the point that he killed Dawn, his beloved sister who always stood up for him, the only one in that house that he had for company. You might recall, in most of the movie adaptations, that Ronnie heard voices in his head that told him to kill his family, but that detail didn't come up until the trial. As you'd expect, a man who was clearly mentally unwell long before the murders went for the insanity defense. Every professional that saw him found that he had some undiagnosed condition or another: paranoid psychotic, antisocial personality disorder, schizophrenia. Take your pick. He had them all. But one thing they could all agree on was that Ronnie was aware of what he was doing. Even with the mind-altering drugs he'd taken, there was no changing the fact that he knew full well that what he'd done was legally and morally wrong. He was found guilty on 6 second-degree murder charges. So yes, I think that this is a case of a son killing his parents because he'd been fantasizing about it for years, and his sibling's death was the tragic collateral damage that comes out of such a heinous act. No demons, no vengeful spirits, and no hidden Native American burial ground on the property. But is that really all there is to it? How did no one hear anything? Why was everyone just coincidentally sleeping in the exact same position? And then there's Dawn. She and Ronnie were both extremely unhappy. Most of their hate was directed to their father, and she did try to move away with her boyfriend. I'd have to say that this was all insignificant if it weren't for the gunpowder on the front of her pajamas. She had to have been awake when it landed there, and probably standing up straight too. She was shot in the back of the head. There's no way that it could have landed on her front while she was sleeping on her stomach. Let's not forget about Luis's large gunshot wounds. Remember that revolver holster that was found with the rifles? Where was the gun that was supposed to be inside it? Well, a resident found a revolver behind the house in the marina's water many years later. It was so degraded by the salt water that it was barely a shell of its former self, but it was the right model and type to leave the large wounds on Luis's body. Was one of Ronnie's many stories true after all? The truth died with him, I'm afraid. He passed away in prison in 2021. And if the reports from the prisoners that knew him are true, he was completely out of his mind for all of those years behind bars. He told anyone who'd listen that he never got to kill his grandmother, something he deeply regretted. He talked to himself, barely slept, and people were afraid of him. He was brought in several times over the years for interrogations, but he never told the same story twice. Truth be told, he probably believed every single one of them at one point or another. The truth was as elusive to him as it is to us, I'm afraid. It's tragic enough that 6 people died so horribly, but to then go on to use their deaths and the house that those murders took place in to make money, that's the hideous act that everyone just looks past in all of the Amityville horror house's history. Hey, if you want me to cover the Lutz's experiences in that house and the reasons why I think they're frauds, let me know, and the Evidence Obscured team will get right on it. And now, it's your turn. How did Ronnie do it all without anyone waking up? Was Dawn involved? And how could everyone be found in the exact same position? Those questions, my friends, are creepier than any movie ever made about the most famous house in the United States. Let me know in the comments below. And like always, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. Your engagement is what keeps the lights on over here. See you in the next one, people.